Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, of a very special guest. His name is Darren Dochuk, and he published a book in 2019. The title of the book is Anointed with Oil, How Christianity and Crude Made Modern America. Fascinating book. I was just reading through the finishing chapters this morning, and this is not his first book. He also has published From Bible Belt to Sun Belt, Plain Folk Religion, Grassroots Politics, and the Rise of Evangelical Conservatism, published 2010. He also has written Sunbelt Rising, The Politics of Space, Place, and Religion and Region. That was 2011. Also in 2014, American Evangelicalism, George Marsden and the State of American Religious History. Also Faith in the New Millennium, The Future of Religion and American Politics, 2016. And God's Businessmen, Entrepreneurial Evangelicals in Depression and War, 2017. And he's coming out with a book in 10 days, October 15, 2021. Title of that book, that sounds like a very timely title, is Religion and Politics Beyond the Culture Wars, New Directions in a Divided America. So I'm delighted to have Dr. Dochuk here. And as you can tell from the titles of his books, his research deals primarily with the United States in the long 20th century, with the emphasis on the intersections of religion, politics, and rising influence of the American West and Sunbelt Southwest in national life. And he teaches courses on U.S. religious history, political history, American society in the 60s and 70s, and the Cold War period, and the politics and culture of energy, oil in particular. So I'm delighted to have him. So Dr. Dochuk, are you there?
I am here, William. Thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people, I mean, you have a long CV. Can you talk about your background? I know you're from Canada, and you teach at Notre Dame, and what led you to write this book, Anointed with Oil?
For sure, and thanks for digging into my roots. I make no apologies for kind of wearing it on my sleeve. I grew up in Alberta, Canada, coming of age really in the 1980s, which, as I say in the book, for the North American oil patch in general was quite difficult, whether you're living in Texas or, in my case, in Alberta. And so, just kind of, I guess, absorbed the politics of religion and oil. Alberta is the Texas of Canada, if you will. It is not just an oil patch. It's also the most conservative religious and political province of Canada. So while I didn't know it at the time, I was absorbing that. And as a scholar doing much work on religion and politics in the Western U.S., it occurred to me that Alberta deserves to be integrated in our stories as well. So that's kind of the personal angle, and this book on religion and oil allowed me to kind of revisit my roots a bit. Thrill for me was to be able to go back to Alberta after publication of the book and give a number of public talks and lectures. And the politics of oil remains very heated in Alberta, as again is the case elsewhere in North America. I guess the scholarly angle here, the reason I got kind of turned on to this project, I spent a lot of time, as you stated earlier, writing about the Southwest, writing about the rise of evangelical conservatism in Southern California, especially from the 30s to the 1980s. And it just seemed, and most of the subjects in the book are Texas and Oklahoma transplants who moved to Southern California during the Depression and World War II. And I track their kind of religious and political kind of institution building in the post-World War II period. And, everywhere I turned, it seemed to be a powerful oil man who was helping fund a ministry or a church, or, even geographically, there was a church steeple on one corner and turn the other way and you'd see an oil derrick. And so it occurred to me that what if we bring these two entities sprawling in their own right together in conversation? And what does that tell us about modern American politics, and what does that tell us about modern American society writ large? And so that was kind of my aha moment as a scholar, and I committed to the project. And we can talk more about different directions that I went in with the book. Suffice to say, I had started with this kind of follow the money narrative, like how does big oil fund big religion? And that certainly is a key part of the book. But I found myself drawn to other questions as well. Perhaps most important, and again, personal to me, is just what is it like to grow up on an oil patch? How does one's proximity to oil help shape the way you work and play, but also worship. And how is religious culture itself grounded in the soil of a place saturated with crude? And so that's how I got interested in the book. And I went for it and have spent a number of years researching and writing it. And in many ways, it was a labor of love.
Yeah, it's really a great book, a fascinating book. But maybe we can just start from where the inception was of how this substance, oil, became something of great value. Maybe you can talk about its beginnings in the U.S., Pennsylvania, and some of the characters involved.
Sure, and it's debatable. I'll again bring my Canadian background here to bear. There's some debate whether oil was discovered in large enough quantities to make it a commodity, a hot commodity on the market in the mid-19th century, whether that happened in southern Ontario or in western Pennsylvania. But for our purposes here, in the late 1850s, early 1860s, oil was chased after by wildcatters in western Pennsylvania. There was a sense that crude existed there. There were these, again, going back to native tribes in the region, there was a record of this kind of mysterious resource along the creeks of western Pennsylvania. And, at that juncture, another source of oil was drying up, and that was whaling. And so there was all the more impetus and more need for an entrepreneurial spirit among this rising class of American businessmen, many of them located in New York along the East Coast, to go find another source that could be used for illumination, for heat, and lubrication, and of course, down the road, of course, what it would mean for fuel as well, its most important application. So during the Civil War, oil is pursued and found in western Pennsylvania, and that really would be the epicenter of oil exploration and production and refining for the rest of the 19th century. From there, and we can take the story to the west, but from there, oil exploration would move west of the Mississippi River and open up really a whole nother chapter in the life and times of petroleum in American life.
And it really kind of, some of these characters really started off there, the names that we know, Rockefeller. Can you talk about the difference between independent and aggregated oilmen and the tension between them, and then how the expression of their Christian worldview influenced what they wanted to do and what they did with the profits of the oil?
Well, you've identified really the driving kind of tension, and I'd like to think it's the dramatic tension of the book. This book covers a lot of ground, moving from the late 1850s to the present day, and so that's a long time period. It covers a wide expanse of geography with focus on North America, but also moving globally. So how to keep that all together was a challenge from the beginning. And I did not have to force the issue to see these two different sectors of oil as kind of the primary subjects in the story of oil and religion in our modern era. How so? As I suggested earlier, the kind of first wave of oil exploration is carried out by wildcatters, kind of fiercely independent small producers who embrace kind of the speculative, daring nature of oil exploration at this time. They move into kind of chartered territory, and with their senses and with all their kind of devices, including spiritualist devices, hunt for crude and try to determine where it exists again below the land. And so it's a bit of a free-for-all for that first decade, the 1860s. The American kind of legal code allows for this kind of rule of capture. Maybe if you've seen There Will Be Blood, the movie of 2008, I believe, this pursuit of crude could be very violent in its own right. And it allowed for the pursuit by any individual to go after and drain subterranean pools at an astonishing rate. That was highly wasteful. So along comes John D. Rockefeller Sr. in the 1870s, 1880s, of course, is going to take over the oil industry. And he represents kind of this new, kind of more bureaucratic kind of Weberian approach to oil exploration, one that tries to contain, tries to centralize the industry, and tries to bring rationale and order to it. And so these two sides, these fiercely independent oilmen and the Rockefellers of the world, are going to compete and clash throughout the 19th century and then into the 20th century. And why does the wildcatter rise again? It's because it's the wildcatters who primarily are going to move west, pushed out of Western Pennsylvania by Rockefeller, and in 1900 and years forward are going to achieve their own kind of independent wealth in Texas, Oklahoma, and California. The rest of the 20th century is really the story of a kind of an ascendant wildcat capitalism in oil that can compete with the Rockefellers and broader major oil companies that are integrated and that have a greater kind of global presence. So those are the two sides of oil, and I can elaborate on how that affects life in the church as well. But I'll let you steer us in the next towards that.
Well, I think what Rockefeller did is he staked his claim on going to he wasn't actually going to search for the oil. He was going to refine it. So he became a refiner, but also was against these wildcatters and put things in place to benefit and control pricing and keep and get rid of competition too. Can you talk about those early? I mean, he also was in Cleveland. He was, I think, a Baptist, if I remember correctly, but and very much involved in church as well as Lyman Stewart, some of George Bissell. These characters, they're all very religious. Maybe we can talk about how these characters' religion influenced this view of this new burgeoning resource and how their religion influenced the hunt for it and what they did with the money.
For sure. So, just briefly outlining these two sectors of oil, the independent producer and the majors represented by the Rockefellers, right? We're dealing with two different emphases. The small producers really most interested in exploration and production. Rockefeller smartly recognizes that it's in refining where one can really truly gain control of the industry itself. And throughout the 1870s, early 1880s, he's going to push out all of his competition in refining in Cleveland, but also along the eastern seaboard. So that really is going to be his power base. And the philosophy here, again, is to push out competition, to centralized operations, and to make it more efficient. And in some ways, I guess what we have here, as I suggest in the book, is kind of two kind of sparring spirits of capitalism. Again, back to Max Weber, who really emphasized the one trajectory of the Rockefellers, and that's the way capitalism itself would kind of reorganize itself and become more bureaucratic and efficient as time wore on. I'm arguing that the wildcat spirit of speculative capitalism also lives on, especially in oil. These two sides represent two different kind of approaches to Christianity and Protestantism, especially, although Catholicism is part of this story as well. And through the book, I trace how this competition in the industry also fuels competition between two classes of churchmen. The Rockefellers, very ecumenical. He's devout Baptist, of course, but his son, especially John D. Rockefeller Jr., will remain devoutly Protestant, but all the more eager to stretch kind of the arm, the reach of American Protestantism onto global scales and to build a larger international ecumenism, very much representative of his approach and his family's approach to oil, to frame a big umbrella under which competing sections can come together for one purpose. Meanwhile, the wildcat side is again this highly kind of Pentecostal, highly evangelical approach to Christianity, which embraces the libertarian spirit of the age witnessed in wildcat oil. That is more speculative, that is more kind of in tune with the mysteries of the natural and the supernatural. And as that moves west to Texas, Oklahoma, it's really going to take root in that region. And what we see today, I think, kind of a more radicalized evangelicalism is in no small part kind of an extension of this fiercely independent, localized wildcat Christianity that will sustain itself throughout the entire century.
So these guys, Rockefeller and his group, Standard Oil, kind of gets rid of all the competition in Pennsylvania. So these characters, to be independent, go to Texas, California. Can you explain their growth and what happened in Texas and how the next kind of step in the oil generation economy grew in Texas?
A lot of luck, but a lot of perseverance and a lot of determination on the part of these small producers really remaps American oil and industry in the 20th century. The running joke in the 1890s, it was claimed that John Archbold, CEO in Standard Oil, joked that he would drink every gallon of oil west of the Mississippi, and this is how sure he was that it really didn't exist in any significant proportions. Of course, he'd be proved wrong quickly in the 1890s, forced out of Western Pennsylvania because of the Rockefeller monopoly. Thousands of smaller oilmen, small oil producers, moved west looking for crude. And again, many of them are amateur geologists. They read the land, they sense the land in ways that we would not consider scientific today. In fact, they shunned some of the early petroleum geologists' wisdom and preferred instead to go hunting for crude with again, spiritualist devices, as you might look for water, for instance, with divining rods and such. Many were devout evangelical Protestantism in their beliefs and looked to the Bible and looked to their own ability to pray for success to steer them forward. And lo and behold, here they are going to succeed on a brilliant scale in Southern California, but especially at the turn of the century in Texas. Spindletop will be the first strike along the shores of the Gulf. And it is kind of the profits of Wildcat Petroleum that are going to spark this revival, if you will, in oil, and essentially redefine the American oil industry itself. All of the energies of exploration and production and refining and transportation will shift to the Southwest at that juncture. It's there that these small producers have already a foothold before the Rockefellers can appear. And that is going to give them the leverage they need to compete both in oil and in the realm of the church to define what the 20th century is going to look like for American life. And there will also, of course, be global repercussions of this. Texas, for the first 50 years of the 20th century, will become really the center of global oil. Again, these small producers are going to benefit mightily because of that.
Right. So you see this new cast of characters. You talk about this character, Patillo Higgins, as the prophet of Spindletop, moving and chasing oil, this kind of wildcatting person. And so you see this happening in California as well. And some people that names that might be familiar is the Pugh family. So you see this, the Rockefellers are monopolizing, using a lot of covering up distribution or handling distribution from railroads. So they were kind of getting rid of competition through transportation of the oil. Can you talk about the Pugh family and how they kind of moved into Texas and their variation of Christianity?
For sure. And back to my earlier point, how to keep this sprawling kind of narrative together and, emphasizing kind of these two warring parties as one way, but also just kind of focusing on the life and generations of particular families. The Rockefellers, through 4 generations, provide kind of one of those paths forward for me when I'm trying to describe the majors and what I call the civil religion of crude that they represent. On the other side of it, it's families like the Stewarts and the Pughs especially. The Stewart family, Lyman Stewart, is worth mentioning. Here's a man who was in the oil business in Pennsylvania. He grew up nearby Titusville, where oil was first discovered in Western Pennsylvania. And a devout Presbyterian, devout evangelical Presbyterian, kind of radically orthodox, if you will. And, he saw his work in oil as directly influencing his work for the church. He wanted to be a missionary at one point, decided against that, thought, I can make a lot of money in oil and use that for the service of the church. He is driven out of Pennsylvania by the Rockefellers almost completely. His business almost completely collapses. And so where does he go? He goes to Southern California, and he will be one of the most prominent oilmen. Will start Union Oil, which might sound familiar to your listeners. And that will become really the only serious competitor to the Standard Oil machine in California in the early 20th century. And he will indeed pour his funds into conservative Protestant causes, whether they be missionaries in China or Peru, or building his own Bible school, Biola, which still exists in Southern
Right, very prominent here in Southern California.
Yeah, and of course, that's all Stewart money. And he will also build Church of the Open Door, which will become really the most important independent tabernacle of the West Coast. So that's one family. Your mention of the Pews, and with the Pews, we really can walk through generations, again, of this family. J. Howard Pugh's father, Joseph Pugh, starts his oil company, actually oil and natural gas in Pennsylvania, but again, is driven to submission by the Rockefellers, angered by that for the rest of their existence. The Pugh family will hate the Rockefellers with a passion, and they will do all they can, both in politics and the church and in the oil industry, to attack the Rockefellers and to try to fight back. Really, the leader of this clan will be J. Howard Pugh, that's the son, and his brother, Joseph Pugh, who will become a very prominent Republican politician. Texas, how does that factor in here briefly? Well, the Pughs will be among the first on the ground in Spindletop near Beaumont, Texas, in 1901. So even though that their company is based in Delaware, Marcus Hook, around Philadelphia, they see the West as opening up for the independents, and they're going to be there before most companies. And as a result, their company, Sun Oil or Sunoco, is going to really gain a foothold in Texas, and that is going to be the lifeline for a broken company. And that company is going to rise to mid-major status through the mid-20th century. And by the 1940s and 50s, J. Howard Pugh will use those profits to fund some of the most important kind of Protestant institutions in America in the late 20th century. So that, in a nutshell, happy to open that up some more.
Right, and I mean, so the Pughs have a rivalry with Rockefeller Standard Oil. Who did they use? Another person who came out of this whole situation in Pennsylvania was Tarbell and her daughter, who also had a very, I think, good Christian conscience in her sensibilities. Can you talk about the Pughs and Ida Tarbell and what happened with her kind of? She was really one of the first muckrakers for independent journalism. Can you talk about her?
Well, as I mentioned to you just a bit earlier, before we got on the air here, Ida Tarbell turned out to be, I think, really one of the most compelling characters that I encountered. I had known a bit about her. Perhaps, if you go back to your high school textbooks, you might have a line or just brief mention of this muckraking journalist, part of a new culture of sensational journalism around the turn of the 20th century, which redefined journalism by really using print media to stir up the muck, to stir up public sentiment against some of the worst kind of excesses of American culture at that time, be they poverty, be they attitudes towards immigrants, or in Ida Tarbell's case, be it towards big business and the power of monopolies like Standard to stamp out the little guy, to stamp out those who wanted to be capitalists as well, but as a result of their lack of resources could not compete with the Standard Oils of the world. And so, she came to this hatred for Rockefeller and Standard quite directly. Her father was, again, another small oil producer in Pennsylvania. She grew up in Titusville, part of a Methodist community there, very devout. And she saw her father quite literally brought to his knees by Rockefeller. In fact, she writes so passionately, with just distraught at seeing the physical features of her father deteriorate as he has to face bankruptcy and failure. That sticks with her, and as she becomes a journalist in the 1890s, she determines that she's going to fight back. And again, wearing her faith on her sleeve, becomes more Quaker than Methodist, sees the damage done to nature by capitalism, sees the damage done to humanity, and she attributes so much of that to John D. Rockefeller Sr., writes an expose that appears as article form, but then as the major book, History of Standard Oil, in the 1900s. And that really stirs public sentiment against the Rockefellers. It also inspires political action, legislative action, legal action against Standard Oil. And in 1911, that's going to result in the forced dismantling of the Standard Oil monopoly. So in many ways, Tarbell, with her passions, her spiritual perspective, and her talents, is almost single-handedly going to bring down the largest company in the world.
And it's a Christian critique as well. I think she writes also that Rockefeller was emblematic of a hypocrisy that had crept into the Christianity of what she remembered. So she's seeing it through this lens of her Christian faith.
Very much. Yeah, let me just add real quick to that. I this is kind of a third way, a third path through the history of oil and religion that I also try to highlight in addition to the sparring spirits of capitalism. And again, if we want to look at today, I just would emphasize that the spirit of Ida Tarbell and the ways in which her faith informed her environmentalism is something that also continues to operate in proximity to the oil industry and in opposition to it today. So,
right. So she kind of saw the independents as using oil to make, I think she wrote The Perfect Man or something. So they're idealized. And then this, terrible monopolist as John D. Rockefeller as really just the opposite of that. I mean, it was an interesting vignette in your book where she actually goes to see Rockefeller at church. And I thought that was really important because it encapsulates those paradoxes of a church-going guy who goes a deacon every Sunday, and then just kind of ruthless social Darwinistic business practices. Can you talk about her impressions of John D. Rockefeller and how that influenced her writing?
That's a very powerful moment that you just highlighted, where she travels to Cleveland, and she travels with one of the most famous illustrators of the period. And again, this is all for the purpose of publishing an expose article in McClure's magazine, I believe. In any case, so she goes to Rockefeller's church, and this is a gentleman who never missed a Sunday or Sunday school. He loved teaching it for 80 years of his life. So very serious about his faith, but in the eyes of Tarbell, not just a hypocrite for the way he was doing damage to, whether it be independent oilmen or just doing damage to capitalism and humanity itself. Besides that, she also saw a very pathetic individual. She actually she looks at his face, and he had a skin condition. So he wasn't the most handsome gentleman at that phase of his life, and to her he looked kind of like a lizard. He kind of looked, he embodied physically everything that was wrong. And the illustrator who was with her captured that in a very famous image that I'm sure many of you would recognize. But point being is she was very passionate about her hatred of the man, but also over the last stage of her career felt sorry for him too, because despite his efforts to succeed at the highest levels, he in fact had sold out his soul as far as she was concerned.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you talk about in the book how so many of these oil figures, they weren't just looking at the U.S. They had really global ambitions for oil, but also their charities or their even, can you talk about how the global nature of oil came out of America?
For sure. And again, as we move deeper into the 20th century, which is, the book covers in great detail, a couple things just to, I think, keep in mind. What happens to American oil around the 1930s, 1940s? Well, there was a fear of domestic reserves running out. One of the first, but not the last, fear of peak oil in American life. But considering the rise of a consumer economy, the need for gasoline, the American federal government and major oil companies led by the Standards, the offshoots of the original Standard Oil, are going to start looking abroad. And, they're going to look to the Middle East. They're going to look to the Near East and ultimately to Saudi Arabia. And so what I try to show in the book is how from the get-go, whether it's into South America or into the Middle East or into Indonesia, there too, crude and Christianity are kind of wedded together. So, for instance, one of the most exciting discoveries for me was working in the British Petroleum Archives, which was hard to get into, but there, through kind kind of deep reading in primary resources, just found how influential local missionaries were, for instance, in that region to helping oil exploration map out and ultimately succeed by the 1930s, 1940s in creating a new infrastructure of global oil led by these American majors and also British Petroleum. And then I spend a good deal of time looking at Aramco, the largest oil company, the largest company today, and its roots, which also has, I think, some fascinating tie-ins between faith and the corporate sector. And I won't go into detail on that, but suffice to say, I think if we want to measure American global power in the second half of the 20th century, we can see big oil and big religion as kind of the twin pillars of American exceptionalism and of American enterprise abroad. Anyway, does that help answer your question there? Maybe that's just one little tidbit, but finally, I'll just say this too. If we want to look at the opposite side of that, the wildcatters, the small producers, the Pews of the world and Sunoco are also going to pursue their own crude on an international scale, although they're always, kind of limited because of their more limited means. So where is Pew going to look? He's going to look to Alberta, in fact, and in the 1950s will become the largest private investor in Canadian history when he invests in a fledgling company, the Great Canadian Oil Sands, which we know today as being, of course, the Athabasca Oil Sands and one of the largest oil reserves on the planet. And it was J. Howard Pew and Sunoco that really got that started in the 1950s.
Right. So that's still relevant to today. Lee, do you mind taking a few questions? I got one right here. It's from Lee. He says, what do you think of the future of crude and natural gas and energy resources?
For sure. Well, I always respond to questions like this that, I'm a historian, not a prophet. I'm much more comfortable in writing about things of the past. But of course, it's important for us to anticipate what happens next. And, I guess the book itself tries to just show how wedded we are to this resource, oil. Now, of course, natural gas is part of that, although my focus was much more just on oil itself, petroleum. We are, dependent on this resource, not just for economic reasons. This isn't just a question of labor. It's not just a question of geopolitics. It is a question of our existence. It's existential. It's theological. So for us to, as a society, to, anticipate alternatives, embrace alternatives, or detach perhaps somewhat from this industry, I argue is going to be, I think, more difficult than people would imagine. And especially if you're looking at life on the oil patch, we can't really split these different sectors of life apart. They are very much, kind of partners. So looking forward, I think oil, the future of oil will continue to be wedded to the future of this country and of our influence abroad. At the same time, I also see and anticipate more of kind of this entrepreneurial spirit witnessed in the early stages of the oil industry in this country as also being influential in anticipating next steps that might be involving renewables or alternative resources of fuel and so forth. So, I don't know if I probably doesn't answer your question completely. I, in general, see more of the same, but also potentials for at least small corrections and shifts.
But it is interesting how you just talked about kind of the importance of oil and how almost religious views toward black gold, sacralization of this resource. I think it was really interesting, and how many people use this evangelical, this one variation of Christianity when they're searching for this anointment, and how much their faith was tied into finding or not finding or the results or everything. It was really fascinating. What else can people expect to find in the book when they find it? Some stuff that we haven't covered. We're about 35 minutes.
Sure. Well, we've talked quite a bit about kind of the first half of this story, the late 19th, early 20th, and for good reason. That really is the founding generation or two, dictating really the path forward, not just for this most powerful industry, an industry that, as I've emphasized, really defines kind of the place of the United States on a global scale. But as we get to the second half of the story, and that's kind of the post-World War II period, I think there are a lot of surprises, I would think, for those readers who might reimagine our recent politics through the lens of oil and religion. We think, for instance, in terms of the rise of the Republican Party along the southern rim of the country, coming, in response to changes in the Democratic Party in the 1960s, or Lyndon Johnson and civil rights, or the economic growth of this region. I would argue, and I show in the book how some of the most important pivots in the Republicanization of the South happened because of the work of oilmen and their allies in the church, beginning in the 1950s over fights about control of offshore oil, fights over who has jurisdiction, Washington or the states, over oil exploration in uncharted territories. And so energy, environment, religion, capitalism are all kind of wound in this narrative of sweeping political change, with which I think we're still living with today, based again on these regional differences. So that I think would be one exciting takeaway from those for those who decide to spend some time in the second half of the book.
Great. And where's the best place for people to obtain Anointed with Oil?
It has been available in bookstores, but I would assume right now Amazon or some online bookseller would probably be the best option.
And do you have like social media or website or anything if people want to reach out to you?
I don't have social media presence, but I certainly welcome, and I always enjoy receiving emails through my Notre Dame account, ddochuk@nd.edu. Feel free to look me up on the history department site here at Notre Dame. And that website will provide you with more information as well. So happy to converse one-on-one.
Great. And also your new book is coming out 10 days. That title of that book is Religion and Politics Beyond the Culture Wars, New Directions in a Divided America. Sounds very timely. Again, the title of this one is Anointed with Oil, How Christianity and Crude Made Modern America, by Dr. Darren Dochuk. Thank you so much, Darren.
Thank you, William.
All right, take care. Stay there. I'm going to turn this on. All right, that was perfect. 30